Good evening, everyone. My name is Joseph Berger, and I am the Theater Operations and Events Manager at Film Forum, an independent, not-for-profit, four-screen cinema in Manhattan's West Village. We are thrilled to co-present this evening's event with Asian American Writers Workshop, and I'd love to welcome Film Forum's Deputy Director, Sonia Chung, who did so much to set this up. There she is. Hi, Sonia.
Hi, Joe. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight on this Saturday evening, this beautiful Saturday evening in New York. We have an embarrassment of riches tonight in terms of these guests, so I'm going to be really, really quick. I just wanted to say a quick word about what makes tonight's event just a little special and unusual. One is this partnership with the Asian American Writers Workshop. We're really excited to bring our two organizations together, bring our audiences together around this film, AGGIE, that is important and exciting to both organizations. So for those of you who are here tonight or who are listening, watching later, the recorded version, we're just thrilled to sort of bring our audiences together in this way. The other thing I wanted to mention is that our guests tonight are, normally when we at Film Forum do an event around a film, we'll have the filmmaker and or the subject of the film, and that would have been Catherine Gund and her mother, Agnes Gund. And Kat's doing a bunch of other events, but if you've seen the film, you know that Agnes Gund, the subject of the film, she is really very committed to supporting activists and artists around the issue of mass incarceration and prison reform. And she's a very rather self-effacing person, really committed to foregrounding and highlighting the work of these artists and activists. So we thought it would be appropriate to do the same. So that's who we have tonight. And we're really excited about it. And Joe is now going to introduce those folks.
Tonight's discussion is on the new documentary AGGIE about the philanthropist and art collector extraordinaire Agnes Gund, directed by her daughter Catherine Gund. Film Forum has premiered two of Catherine's previous feature documentaries, Chavela, about the beloved Mexican singer Chavela Vargas, and Born to Fly, a portrait of choreographer Elizabeth Streb. With AGGIE, Catherine turns her lens on her camera-shy mother and how her love for art and artists led her to devote her energy and wealth to support the fight for racial justice. We are proud to present this title on our virtual cinema platform. If you have yet to see the film, please consider renting it at filmforum.org. Okay, now I'm going to bring in our guest moderator tonight, Dr. Rachel Kuo. Rachel, come on in. Rachel writes, teaches, and researches race, social movements, and digital technology. She is a founder and co-leader of the Asian American Feminist Collective and a current guest editor for World Without Cages at the Asian American Writers Workshop. Hi, Rachel. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Our first panelist tonight is Mahogany Brown. Mahogany Brown is a writer, organizer, and educator. She is the executive director of Bowery Poetry Club, artistic director of Urban Word NYC, and poetry coordinator at St. Francis College. Mahogany received a fellowship from Agnes Gund and is an Arts for Justice grantee. She is the author of Woke, A Young Poet's Call to Justice, Woke Baby and Black Girl Magic, Kissing Caskets, and Dear Twitter. Mahogany, how are you? Thanks for being here.
Doing good. Thanks so much for having me.
Adnan Khan is the executive director of Restore Justice, a nonprofit organization he co-founded while incarcerated. Adnan also created First Watch, a media filmmaking project produced entirely by currently incarcerated people. He continues his advocacy work nationally as well as internationally. Hi, Adnan, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
And finally, please welcome Tanya Salvaratnam. Tanya is here to say a few words of introduction before our discussion. Tanya is an artist, a writer, an Emmy-nominated and Webby-winning producer who has collaborated with the Vision and Justice Project, Planned Parenthood, The Meteor, and Glamour Women of the Year. For Aubin Pictures, in addition to AGGIE, Tanya produced What's on Your Plate and Born to Fly, which we showed a few years ago. Hi, Tanya. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. So welcome, everybody. I am so excited and grateful that Film Forum is the theatrical premiere for AGGIE. It feels like a home for me and for a number of projects by Aubin Pictures. And I look forward to when we can one day experience this iconic venue in person again. For me, Film Forum is synonymous with New York cinema. Now, I first started working as a producer for Catherine Gund 13 years ago, and she's like family to me. And what I love about our projects is Catherine comes to me with the spark of an idea for a film, and I jump in and say, yes, this must be seen. But with AGGIE, it was different. Catherine asked if I would join her to film AGGIE in conversation with the friends and family and artists in her life, just to capture the conversations. She did not want to make a movie, even though many people over the years had tried to get her to make one about her mother, Agnes Gund. But after every one of these conversations, I would pull Catherine aside and say, I think you're making a movie. And well, here we are. What I love about this film is it was in turn inspired by a film. You know, Agnes Gund, after seeing Ava DuVernay's 13th, decided the next day that she was going to throw down her glove to fight mass incarceration. And then she founded the Art for Justice Fund. AGGIE is such an example of when somebody is inspired by art to make a difference. And I'm really excited that you are going to hear from Mahogany Brown and from Adnan Khan, who are people who every day are working to make sure that the world is a better place. And also very excited that they are Art for Justice grantees. Now, what I hope for this film, it cannot be coming out at a more crucial time. And what I hope that it inspires is that we remember 2020 as not just the year when everything fell apart, but when we had an opportunity to come together and make things better. Now, as the producer, I'm going to make a few plugs. Please visit the website, aggiefilm.com, and check out our discussion guide and our social impact campaign. Please also follow Aubin Pictures on Instagram so you can stay up to date on our events and screenings. We have dozens of theatrical releases planned for all over the country, thanks to our amazing distributors, Strand Releasing. And with that, I'd like to say enjoy the film and enjoy this terrific conversation you're about to hear. I can't wait to hear it myself. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for that introduction. And thank you so much, Joe and Sonia, for opening us up. Mahogany and Adnan, it's so wonderful to be in conversation with you both and to share this space together. I'm a huge fan of both of your works. And I'm really glad that Tanya started and brought us back to Ava DuVernay, because the film AGGIE begins with the quote, "Like art, justice requires imagination. It requires us to imagine a world that isn't there and to make it so." And similarly, activists and organizers in the ongoing movement for prison abolition and to end mass incarceration have been talking about it as a project of putting radical imagination, such as the reimagination of safety, justice, healing, and relationships into practice. And so I'd love to begin with a question that talks about what is the kind of world that you're imagining and the work and the projects that you're doing with the Art for Justice grant. And as a backdrop, right, the Asian American Writers Workshop World Without Cages project that's also funded through Art for Justice is exploring the literature of mass incarceration and migrant detention together by bringing together the work of writers on the inside and side. And we're currently expanding our collection and portfolio to think about how people who are incarcerated fight against the system, and what does safety feel like and look like without the carceral system, and what a liberated world without prisons and police could look like. So my first question to you both is what it is you're hoping to build and what projects are you working on, and how do the different forms and genres you work with, ranging from poetry, YA novels, films, and also policy, help us to imagine and build that world? And Mahogany, if you could answer first, that would be great.
Thanks. Such a good question. I feel like this is one of those questions that we can return to year after year. It's excellent, especially as a timestamp and a reminder that we have work to do. So when I'm thinking about the work that I was able to create as an Art for Justice fellow, at first it just became, I wanted to archive this moment. I am a child of someone who's been in prison for the majority of my life. All of the men in my family have been affected by prison. Not just impacted, like affected, like deeply, like their entire lives. Coming from Oakland, California, it's kind of a part of the journey, right? They just assume that it's going to happen to you. And for a long time, I blamed us. I blamed the bodies in prison. I didn't know any better. I just knew that they did something wrong, and it took me having time away from that space by coming to New York, of course, and not being just with my family, for me to see like the systematic issues that were put into play that preyed on these men in my family, and preyed on our economic devastation, and preyed on the addictions and the afflictions. And so all the writing that I'm doing now is because of that time that I had to gather not just my own story, but talking to others, and getting some blueprint work done so that we can find our way to each other, because it's quite shameful, right? We're shamed into thinking that once you're part of the mass incarceration system, one, it's your fault. Two, what are you going to do to make it better? And three, if you can't make it better, then you probably deserved it. So like the shame is just constant, and that's our heirloom. And I wanted to dismantle that as a family heirloom first and foremost.
Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing what you said about the time it takes to gather stories and your journey into this work. Adnan, if you could answer the question as well.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Mahogany, as well. I mean, I did 16 years in a California state prison, and you talked about Oakland and how many people, Black and brown people in prison we have from Oakland or from Los Angeles or from these areas that are directly linked to poverty, over policing, which is not safety. And that's probably, we'll probably get into that a little bit later, the ideas of safety. But it's sad to see like some of those, like you mentioned, Mahogany, the systemic threads of incarceration. Well, first I'll answer your latter question, Rachel, was as far as with the Art for Justice and my participation with it and being a grantee of Art for Justice. We do two things. One is our goal is, or our slogan is, from proximity to policy. I truly believe that most people have ideas about people in prison, but don't know people in prison, nor do they get to see people visually, like in prison. So one thing that I was very kind of like miraculously with the group of people was able to start inside while I was incarcerated in San Quentin was a media project called First Watch. So just very basically imagine a group of incarcerated people, a handful of incarcerated people walking around with cameras and filming our own story and sitting down and storyboarding our own stories and editing our own videos and putting our own sound on the video. So everything that you see was either shot, edited, or scored by currently incarcerated filmmakers. And not filmmakers because they're incarcerated, but let's not qualify them by they're great because they're incarcerated. So we saw ourselves trying to equal the playing field and really share our own stories. And linking it back to, historically, the concept of punishment and public display, right? Back way back when people would be marched into the marketplace and either hanged or assaulted or beaten, and people would have snacks and watch this happen. This is, before even the printing press. But then you fast forward, and then the wanted posters, the lynching postcards, how media and the display and perception, what that did to additionally stigmatize and stereotype people who commit harm. Because one thing we don't realize is what those pictures and those stories don't tell, or what they don't tell you on purpose, is people who have been harmed sometimes, many times, at least in my situation, end up doing the harm. And to harm them further is not public safety. So then you fast forward to radio and then mass incarceration with media. We have seen over and over Law and Order, CSI, the news, language. When we use language of offender, inmate, convict, murderer, gang member, those are word associations that have treatment, certain mistreatment that follows those words. That's also linked to the media and the visual and the podcast now that we hear about the whodunits. So anyways, starting that and then being free now because of COVID, obviously that program has been on pause, which is in San Quentin. But my larger goal is to put as many film kits into small filmmaker crews that are currently incarcerated with this grant, which is still going to continue. But our major work, that's narrative shaping. Our major work is ending or trying to have a new way of how we look at violence and harm. And yes, there's mass incarceration. There's also static incarceration where people are sentenced to life in prison or extreme sentences. Like I was sentenced to 25 years to life at the age of 18. So we want to try to narrative shape and educate the public on new ways to look at and repairing harm.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate you saying was like from proximity to policy, and also really pointing out the ways that mainstream media and other forms of media have also brought us to this current system of mass incarceration that we have today. So there's something very much at stake of this question of art and media making a material change, which I think both of your work does so well in terms of how we can imagine our systems in these really concrete ways. And I think there's something too that what you're both pointing at too, and that also happens in the documentary, right? When Aggie watches the 13th, that there's something about media making that incites this breaking point for political action. And I think a question that continues to kind of circulate right now is like, what are the forms that these actions can take? And I've been in a lot of conversations lately about the question of solidarity and allyship, and I'm sure both of you may have had as well. And I've been thinking a lot about the story of the Art for Justice Fund emerging out of the selling of a painting for hundreds of millions of dollars. And this offers one model of the redistribution of power, resources, and influence. And it also really opens up a lot of questions about both the potential and the limits of allyship. Because on the one hand, you have these space-making politics that allows the resourcing of voices and platforms, right? Like the work that you're both doing. And on the other, there's this really complicated tension when private capital and liberal philanthropy also becomes the solution for when public benefits are getting cut and social safety nets are getting threatened. And so you kind of are in this trap where in the leveraging of privilege and these associated levers of inequality remain. And at the same time, though, we're really seeing the necessity of the redistribution of resources to sustain community-based work and infrastructures. So the question that I have for you both now is also, what are the different forms of action that you hope people can take now and in the future? So the kinds of action that you hope your work incites people to do? And what are some of the complications and challenges that you're observing in this question of allyship and solidarity, and the kinds of value systems that we might need to shift in order to end mass incarceration? And Adnan, if you can answer first, that would be great.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. It's hard to answer on a 1 hour Zoom. And I agree with Mahogany. We can probably do this not just every year, probably every week, if anything. So I don't even know where to start with that. You talked about our slogan, I guess, from proximity to policy. And then there's also like, for me, many times I have to reevaluate what my trust in policy is, right? In the system that's already here. I'm a recipient of going through the process, right? Of changing a law within our California, our state Senate and Assembly and our legislature. And I was granted relief. My life sentence was vacated after 16 years because of a law that we helped pass. So it worked for me in that sense, and it was going to work for hundreds, maybe even close to 2,000 people with this specific law here in California. But then what I think when we look at a society, take a step back from there, what is it that we need to create a more just and equitable society? Even in the times of the George Floyd protests, we're seeing very, very, very performative, in my opinion, reforms. Very performative. We can ban chokeholds, but that doesn't stop anyone from shooting Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta, right? And so we keep putting bandages on things that we need surgery for, and there's been resistance. So a solution is we have to mobilize and organize. We have to be one body, on one accord. But I think a lot of that has to do with individual education. Even with advocacy, I see many times that people can or we can create distinction and division amongst each other in terms of just how we misunderstand, for example, violence. People say we should let out nonviolent, low-level people with drug offenses only. But I went to prison for a life sentence, and I understand that we can't create that distinction of who deserves and who doesn't. It has to be a holistic approach to healing harm. And one, before I end this right here, I just want to say that we have been the idea of safety has been sold to us. When we look at capitalism, racial capitalism in particular, it's a product. Safety is a product, and it's marketed through fear, quite literally through merchandise of house alarms, car alarms. And I'm not speaking against those things. I have a house alarm here for my own safety and protection. But those things are literally marketed. We talked about media as well. But then policing in prisons, what it does, it gives that legitimacy. But it's false legitimacy because that does not create safety. When I was 17, by the time I was 17, I was a traumatized, parentless, homeless, high school dropout. At 18, I committed a crime. That's when the police showed up. There weren't any services. There wasn't any funding into communities. One, to provide me mentorship because I was parentless, literally provide me food and shelter, quite literally, like a house and food. I was hungry. And school, we know the school to prison pipeline concept and how that we have over policing in schools. So one, just to generalize, we have to educate ourselves and not to create distinctions, and then come with a strategy to move as one accord.
Thank you so
I'm
much
here
for
for
that.
that, Adnan. So much so, actually. I will sign up literally for whatever Adnan is saying to do. Like, this is someone I follow you online. Like, you're constantly speaking the truth, and you also push against the moments of friction where it's kind of scary, right? So when you say something like, it's not enough to just say let out, low offenders and nonviolent. That's not enough. That's base level. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I love the idea of holistic approach to decarceration. I think that the divestment situation, like defund the police doesn't mean no police. It means defund them because they have entirely too much money and they're basically being rewarded for murder. But if, like anything else, we take that money and put it into community organizing, community education, grassroots efforts, youth-led workshops, because the youth already understand. They're the ones that are telling us what's happening now, because some of us, we get out of that age bracket where we are stopped and frisked all the time. And then for some reason, I don't know if it's like a Jedi mind trick, but people believe like it doesn't exist the same anymore until it shows up on TV. It does exist the same, if not more. You may just be kind of numb, right? You're numb to it. And a lot of us have survivor's remorse. We're like, we barely made it out. Why do I have to go back? But that's why we have to go back. We have to make sure that everybody makes it out, that it is not, what is that? One of those courses is like, I don't know, it's obstacle course where they run in the mud, they do all that. This is not that. This is life. We should not have to go through that kind of obstacle to get to own a house and raise a family, and maybe write books. Like, that shouldn't be the order specifically for Black and brown bodies, because that feels like we are just a part of this a game. We're a part of this exercise, and it really is genocide. So community organizing, art is activism. The power in art is that people are tired of being talked at. They're tired of being lectured, and art is subversive, and it is tricky. You think, oh, I'm just looking at a pretty painting, and then you realize, you are witnessing a revelation, and then you realize, oh, this is actually a mural for someone who was murdered, and oh, Breonna Taylor, why would I know her name? But now I must know her name because I have her pictures everywhere, and we can glorify the beauty in their lives, but we can't glorify their death. We can't do that. Those don't go hand in hand. We have to make it so it never happens again, and we have to give the power back to the people. So yes, policy change, yes, youth leadership, yes, art is activism and as a teaching model.
Thank you both for that. And I think one of the things that you're also helping us all reflect on, right, is that when we think about a holistic change, it's not just changing the system, but changing our relationships with one another as well, right? And like to rethink the connections that we have for each other of what does it mean to have community safety, and how does that mean, what does that mean in terms of reflecting on the relations that we have with each other and the different intimacies. And one of the things that I've been reflecting on is, so the film offers insight into the ways that people grapple with uncomfortable questions of guilt, and also the production of empathy through acts of witnessing. And I've been reflecting a lot lately on the difficulty of empathy, right? When there's a kind of imagining of oneself in place of those experiencing violence in order to render that violence as something intelligible and legible. And I've been thinking a lot about the writer Christina Sharp, where she describes representation in art as an arena of conflict and confrontation in ways that provoke questions around intimacy and our different relationships to violence. And I think both of you have shared a little bit about this, right? Of like this kind of moment of encounter of a work of art. And this happens at different levels of proximity and distance, right? And so the ways that empathy can invoke feelings that can remedy indifference and spark change, while at the same time can sometimes reinforce a distance, right? And so particularly in the engagement of art and writing by people who are incarcerated, and also art and writing about mass incarceration, there's often both this figurative and literal distance that happens. And so I guess the question that I have as a follow-up to the earlier one is, what are the ways that you're hoping to invite people into your artwork and your political projects? Or to put in another way, what are the kinds of forms of engagement, new relations, intimacies, and proximities that you're hoping to forge through how people encounter your works and your projects? And if you can answer that first.
Absolutely. I'm going to answer this short and sweet because I think it's changing. It's ever changing for me. First, it started out as archive and historical living work for families to have discussions and to illuminate things that have been put into shadows, to demystify the shame. Great. And I hope it helped. I hope it worked. But now I'm looking and I'm realizing like there's this conversation that isn't happening with our children, right? With the kids of those who are incarcerated, with the kids who are friends of those who have parents who are incarcerated. And children make adults come to the light far quicker than anything else. It's like it's the mirror turning back on you, the reflection turning back on you. When a kid asks you, what are you doing? And maybe you're sneaking something, sneaking candy before dinner, whatever. But that moment of like, oh, everything that I'm saying for you to do to be the best possible you are turning that question on me. And how do I fare? So writing now, I just finished a book called Woke, A Young Poet's Call to Justice. And it's all about building blocks for these global citizens. What does it mean to think about empathy and forgiveness and allyship and ableism and body positivity and volunteering and stereotyping and silencing and racism when talking to an 8-year-old? It's hard talking about it with adults, but it was more difficult thinking about those very large ideas when talking to young people. And writing the book, it then became quite clear that this book should have already been written, because if folks in Congress had read this, it wouldn't be such a hard thing to talk about restorative justice and intersectionality and transformative justice and immigration. Like, you would understand building blocks as empathy as a part of this justice system. Once we do that, we align those things. It's not so far-fetched. We're no longer working in that fear-based space, and we're no longer working through scarcity. Like, if I give a little bit, for equality, then I'll have nothing. So I'm all about talking to the young people, because our time is numbered, right? Like the old guards, that gatekeepers, like however you think that that blue blood money and that generational wealth is going to sustain you, if it is not for the people, you will lose it. You will lose it soon, because the people are rising every day with harder questions, with demands for equity and equality, as they should. And for far too long, we have had these imaginary borders in our very neighborhoods. And this is a part of detangling those ideas.
Thank you so much for that. Adnan, if you want to answer this question.
I don't think I can follow up with that one. That was very profound. And Rachel, your questions lead with so much wisdom itself. I mean, I could sit and listen to you both all day, really. So it's hard to answer like about.
Agreed.
Again, yeah, directly answer that. I will say that let's look at art for a second. Let's just look at Aggie and Roy Lichtenstein's painting, which I believe, and someone can fact check me, it was 1962 that he painted that. And so here we are 60 years later, and what it's doing, I mean, it was painted during the 60s, right? The civil rights era. I mean, we had Martin Luther King assassinated that decade. We had Malcolm X assassinated that decade. JFK assassinated that decade. I mean, it was a very heavy decade in the 60s, followed by a war. You know, like it was a lot was going on. But here we are 60 years later, and that painting has sold, and a large chunk, historic chunk of that money went to reform or abolition or equity in our society for Black, brown, poor people. And so art, people can sometimes we don't. I feel like I'm not so in depth with art. Like I wish I understood it more or had more time with it. I'm interested in it, but just generally as a person who just I guess I'm in and out of it in terms of how much investment I put into my time with it. I know that the power in it. Everywhere we turn, we are influenced by art. We may not identify it as art, but everything. What do you have on right now? Your shoes, your shirt. Where did you get that from? There was marketing behind that. That was art. It was shown to you either through video, through audio, through a billboard, through word of mouth. And where did they get that from? Everything is graphic design now is coming online. Art influences everything in our life. Everything. Why do you have that computer? Why do you have that laptop? Why do you have an iPhone versus an Android? Everything. So why can it not influence our political culture? And it does. And the beauty about it is, like I mentioned in Roy Lichtenstein, 1962, it's timeless. So a piece of painting can have many iterations and last a long, long time. So I don't think we should ever underestimate art, because it's quite frankly omniscient. And then I forgot the rest of your question.
The follow-up to that, and I think one of the questions too from the audience that I think we'll get to next, but I think this is actually a really good pivot for also clarification, since you're talking about art influencing capital. And so one of the questions from the audience was to clarify the term racial capitalism, which you used earlier. And then as the follow-up to what you had just said was the kinds of ways then, what are the kinds of new forms of intimacies and proximities that you hope to forge as people encounter work that you're doing? And yes, to Adnan, yeah.
Oh, wow. Racial capitalism. Would you mind taking a time travel to 1619 with me? Because it truly, it really, really starts there. So when we look at capitalism, and so let me give you an example. This country was quite literally built on valuing of property, material wealth, and wealth. And it was done so through genocide, to a point where in 2020, we have a 17-year-old, Kyle Rittenhouse, who crosses state lines with an AR-15 to protect property he doesn't own, kills 2 people, and is still seen as a patriot. Because what he did was quite frankly, quite exactly what the system is built on. You protect property when people are marching because someone was killed and shot. And so going all the way back to enslaved people, we cannot forget the economics around it. Even when we talk about the 13th Amendment, sure, I do celebrate the 13th Amendment and the abolishment of slavery, but in the very same sentence which we quite overlook many times is slavery is still legal for those who are duly convicted. I'm paraphrasing. And so immediately after the Civil War, we had convict leasing. We had more laws for Black people and eventually Black and brown people, where if you were a person who was enslaved and now was free and you jaywalked, there was history that says, facts that says people were sent right back to the very same plantation they came from to serve their sentence. And at the turn of the 20th century with the Industrial Revolution, and now we have assembly lines and more production happening, where you can't just be sentenced in the past where you would be sentenced to 6 months for harvesting. Sentencing was always related to work and labor, right? So it's not safety, it's not rehabilitation, it's not addressing the need of people that do say commit harm. It's not that. It's I'm going to sentence you to 6 months because you know what? We need 6 months to pick this cotton, tobacco, sugar, whatever. But when the Industrial Revolution happened, sentencing started slowly getting longer. And now we need more time for people. Now talk about mass incarceration in the 80s. If you're a business owner and you have a turnover rate of every 2 months, your main workers are rotating. There's a new worker every 2 months. That's not a quality product. You actually need people to be in prison or that job much longer. And so here we are in the 1970s, a life sentence was 7 years to life. We have a higher population of people now in 2020, less crime than it was in the 70s, but we have more people in prison significantly, serving longer sentences with more jobs in prison that pay you basically either nothing or 8 cents an hour like I was getting paid. And so when I bring in racial capitalism, it's Black and brown bodies and poor bodies that are being used for that labor in 2020.
Thank you so much for that. And I think really what you're getting at too, right, is the way that racial capitalism is about the exploitation of difference for this accumulation of wealth that is not benefiting everyone, right, and the kind of uses of difference for that extractive and exploitive work. And I think both of you really bring up, right, like these intergenerational legacies. And Mahogany, I love that you really brought us to, in many ways, the future, right? Like through how we can focus on youth and the ways that we draw upon these histories in order to inspire the future. And Adnan, the ways that you kind of point to this like longer legacy of where we are today. So I really appreciate that kind of historical and future weaving together. I'm going to shift to some questions from the audience now. And for those who are listening, you're welcome to keep adding questions into the Q&A, and I'll fold them into my questions like here for our panelists here. So you're invited to do that. And Tanya, I'd love to invite you back into our conversation as well. So more people here in our little gallery view and in our conversation. So to get us started, one of the questions has been, was about, can art bring about positive change? And I think tied into that question that I've also kind of hearing, right, was that there have been different points of learning and education for you all and artworks that have sparked that. So when linked to this question of art bringing about positive change, I'd love for you all to answer, can you speak to who are the artists, writers, and activists that are currently or have made work that inspires you and have moved you to act? And whoever feels ready to go first can go.
I'll jump in. Mariam Kaba, a prison abolitionist. I mean, I think that she's like a go-to for a lot of folks who are introduced to the PIC work of now. Desmond out in Florida, Desmond Meade with the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, always Angela Davis, always Cornel West. Like there are pillars who have been doing the work for so long. I think those are, and Tango Eisen Martin, actually, the work that he's doing with Black Freighter Press and the 3% in the Bay Area in San Francisco is really invigorating and inspiring. I'm really inspired by anybody who is willing to make themselves uncomfortable for someone else to possibly see some kind of freedom, some kind of justice.
I can jump in here too. For me, I'm infinitely inspired by artists, past, present, and future. And one that I keep returning to is James Baldwin, who I think of often, and specifically this quote by him that kind of keeps me going, which is from The Creative Process. And the precise role of the artist is to make the world a more human dwelling place. And I feel like that is such an important call to action for these times. And we see artists all around us who are doing that to make this world a more human dwelling place, with the musicians who are entertaining frontline workers, essential workers, people in their communities. And I think about what Darren Walker says in the film so beautifully about the importance of the Art for Justice Fund, when he talks about how without art there is no empathy, and without empathy, there is no justice. I feel like we all have a role to play. And it's what Ava DuVernay speaks about as well in the film, about art requires imagination and justice does as well. So that's what inspires me. What Darren said, what Ava said, what James Baldwin said so long ago. And I also think about what Flo Kennedy said, not an artist, but in many ways she was as an activist. And that mantra keeps me going as well. Don't agonize, organize. And boy, that is so important right now. That's what I have to say.
I'll definitely have to echo Tanya and Mahogany's choices. And just to give a shout out to a lot of my colleagues who are still incarcerated. I've seen so much art from people who either formerly or currently incarcerated, art, and I mean all sorts of art. There's artists, there's painting. I mean, there's muralists. There are musicians, teachers, orators. Like there's so much inside that is so hidden because we don't have a visual view of what happens behind prison walls. So just give a shout out to a lot of artists that none of us really know. They just sit in their cell and express. So it's hard for me to just name a bunch of people, but I've done, like I said, this 16 years and it's not even that, oh, they're just remarkable artists, but it's just the beauty in what people create. I've seen people create Harley Davidsons out of state issued soaps, sculpting out of state issued soaps. And I think when I asked him, I remember like, hey, why Harley Davidson? I mean, it was gorgeous too, right? And it was his childhood. It reminded him of his eventual absent father. And so as much as people, I know some people don't, they love to look at art and experience whatever they experienced, visualizing whatever their art is without knowing the backstory. I'm more of I love the backstory. And also in the advocacy space or activism space, the backstory has been extremely important because that's what's been creating safety, quite frankly, what people miss that a lot as well. And real quick, I'm going to segue for a quick second and say that the whole defunding the police, abolition, a lot of people, for some reason, misunderstand it as going to create havoc and chaos in the streets and not realizing that's what's happening. And people want a safe society. And so what we're presenting is what stops and prevents harm, what heals people actually prevents harm. It just, people don't understand that. But going back to the direct question about my favorite artists, I think they're still incarcerated. Some are out now. And then always a shout out to Bob Marley. He has movement music. There is a lot of movement music right now. I just got through a lot of years with his music in my ear inside. But I mean, his albums name are, Rebel Music, Survivor. Like those are the names of albums, and his song titles. It's just revolution. It's music for the revolution. That's what kind of is my motor right there.
Ooh, can I add something to that? Because what Adnan said and what Mahogany said just sparked some other idea for me. We've lost so many heroes in the arts community because of COVID and also just during these times, and thinking about Chadwick Boseman. And he is a hero for me. And also what we've been witnessing in these times is is a descendancy of celebrity culture and an ascendancy of like essential workers being heroes, like the everyday workers. And I hope that that is something, even in these tragic times, that continues, and that the incarcerated artists that Adnan speaks about, that they become our heroes of the future.
Thank you for that. And a follow-up from the audience is, Tracy would love to know if you could name some of the ones that you can, the incarcerated writers that you know that their names are worth saying out loud as an audience member. If there's specific people that you would like to uplift at this time. And then I have a follow-up question for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think what kind of sucks about that is I know like their nicknames, right? And so if I could tell you like Red, right? Who would know Red in San Quentin? Who would know, so maybe I need to do a better job in asking their consent, first of all, because a lot of it's individual. Maybe I can send it to you and we can post it later. But I will say there's two artists that are formerly incarcerated I did time with. One is a young man named Eric Maserati E, or Abercrombie. He is one of the, he's young, he's in his 20s, and he's an amazing musical artist. He used to just carry a guitar in prison on his back everywhere he went, and people would be like, hey, play that song. And his music is very conscious as well. Something that I feel like is just missing, the simplicity of guitar and rap/singing, but the content of what he's saying about systemic oppression, powerful. His name is Eric Maserati E. You can YouTube him, and he's out here right now. He's the next best thing. Seriously, I'm not even just trying to pump him up. The other one is Lumumba, or Gus Edwards. He spent almost 40 years in prison, was sent to the security housing unit for a while. He was locked up in the 70s in that era. And he's out now. And he has exhibits in Alcatraz. Alcatraz had an exhibit recently. So his name is Lumumba, or aka Gus Edwards is his name. So I want to highlight them. And they're both out right now, Eric Maserati E and Lumumba.
And I'd like to add to that, there are a number of formerly incarcerated persons who are Art for Justice grantees and who are out there as artists now, Russell Craig and Jesse Crimes. So I want to give them a big shout out because they are formerly incarcerated persons and artists.
I had the honor of just working with Russell Craig for our first Art for Justice RFP rapid response, and you actually will be the first to see it live. Yes, it's an entire archive project. I was able to interview him for a couple of weeks. His artwork lives in these pages, and when we talk about how art is changing our lives and how music is, you were talking about Bob Marley, like he has Kendrick in here. He has Nipsey in here. And of course, we're really talking about like, how does one survive and where our humanity thrives. So I agree, all of that. Support your local artists. And if you don't know, follow Adnan, you'll find out.
Thank you all for bringing up those different people. Somebody that I also really look to for analysis is Stevie behind Study Abolition. And there's like a great journal called In the Belly that is also circulating with writers on the inside and the outside. And I've been thinking a lot about like the role of paper, right? Because I think the kind of conversation often about activism right now is like how it's so digital, but I think especially now in this moment, also the importance of like what it means to also work with paper and zines and circulating some of that writing and artwork. And which is some of like the work that at least with the writers workshop and soliciting new submissions right now, we're like turning to the zine format and like working with different collectives and circulating those, which has been like an interesting way just to think about the materiality of writing and artwork. And Mahogany, earlier you brought up Miriam Cabo, who's also one of the feminist abolitionist leaders that I also really look to. And I remember a long time ago in an interview that she did, she talked about the difference between safety and security. And that word safety is one that seems to be a thematic that keeps coming up in our conversation. And I think some of the questions that we're also getting from the audience, right, are trying to reconceptualize this question of like what justice is, like what does it mean to try to change the system instead of being around punishment. And so I would love maybe just to take a little bit of time and just a little bit of a pause to also maybe hear like how you define safety for yourselves and your communities. Because I think we've been kind of circulating around like the different ways that sometimes how safety gets defined from the state is often, right, creating a lot of conditions of harm and unsafety, or lack of safety, in other words. And so I just kind of want to pause on that word for a little bit as for one question, and then I have other follow-up questions. But
I love that question. And I love that it keeps coming up with Adnan, what you were talking about, how you say safety, but safe for whom, right? Like, not to say that people who have committed a crime don't deserve, like, accountability is necessary, but there are ways that you can demand accountability without further harming. Like, you're harming not just the person who's already been traumatized, because we're not talking about the court proceedings and what that can look like, but you're harming the person who you deem criminal. You're harming their family, you're harming their generations to come, you're harming the community that they're a part of. We have entire households that have been racked clean of family, of providers, and all of it has to do with what would happen if, instead of we call the cops, we call a community leader who knows the family. What does it mean to say if you know, and I mean, physical things do happen, so like, how do we bring in a counselor who can help, you know, get us to the next stage? And what does transformative justice really look like? What does restorative justice really look like? We are losing actual people to a system that is not giving them any kind of restorative care either. There is no redemption there either. There's I mean, sometimes they can get clean, but I mean, I know plenty of people who still are not clean and have been locked up. You know what I mean? So I'm interested in safety for everyone. And I know that is like a lofty idea, but this ain't working. What we found out is this doesn't work this way. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked. And the only people who are benefiting are those who are, you know, reaping the benefits of like actual slavery. Like, you're benefiting off of blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah, I would add to that just 100 on everything that Mahogany said, and also the generational trauma that's passed down because of the normalization of the cycle of violence, and how can we work together to ensure safety for future generations, and especially for, you know, Black and brown women, Native and Indigenous women. And it's something that I find especially urgent right now, especially during COVID, because we've seen how rates of violence against women have been on the rise around the world, and disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities and Native and Indigenous communities. And when we look at the statistics of women who are incarcerated and how many of them are past victims of some kind of violence or sexual abuse, when we look at the rates of houseless people and how many of them are past victims of sexual or physical violence, things have got to change. So it's not just about fighting mass incarceration and modern day slavery. It's also about fighting against the cycle of violence that we have been conditioned to accept from the time that we are born. And when we talk about defunding the police, people often misconstrue the narrative or warp the narrative. What it means for me is about redirecting some of those resources to community organizations and to restorative justice organizations and to trauma counseling and mental health services. And I think that is where I see a lot of hope for the future. That's me.
Yeah, Tanya, you talked about COVID. I think that one thing that COVID has highlighted is that our individual safety is linked to the safety of others. So I can't be safe if you're not safe. And if you're not safe, I'm not safe. And that is applicable to our justice system. And so people think that safety is very individual. Hey, let me be safe from you and create a separation. And this is goes way back to history, right? Where they had fortress towns and fortified castles, where if you committed a crime or harm, you would be banished outside of the wall. And then when society slowly started to change and widen up, now they will put you inside the wall. But what happens when you're inside the wall, what we ask for is first of all, it doesn't keep you safe. The crime doesn't stop. The rotation of what's happening in our society in terms of harming people does not stop until you reevaluate the conditions of individuals. And so that is where safety really heavily relies on me, is like, okay, why did I commit a crime at 18 years old? You know, I always like to say that I was an 8-year-old Little League baseball player, and I went to an 18-year-old with a life sentence in prison. And I believe it was Jesse Jackson who said, none of us are born armed and dangerous. So what was it in my life that led me to make that decision that night? But then also before that, there's stages, and I just want to end here. I know we're running out of time. Is accountability. Nothing in the system kept me accountable. Nothing. My sentence didn't say, hey, you need to admit what you did was wrong, because they threw me into a maximum security prison with extreme violence with the population and the administration. And so nowhere did they say, Adnan, be accountable for what you did, which is like, you know what, I did do wrong. And then the next stage is understanding, why did I do it? So then once I started investigating my own conditions, I learned very quickly. And I want to say that I'm right now, my activism is making amends to the harm that I've done to the family and the community, because I can take responsibility and say, yes, I did wrong. But the truth is, there's a kid is homeless right now, that's on their way to harming themselves or others. And if I don't systemically make amends, then I'm not making a complete amends. So that's where we have multiple layers of failure within our system of how we view safety or misunderstand safety.
The community owed you more. We owe you more.
Thank you all for pointing out all of those like different ways that we can conceptualize safety. And I think kind of also pointing to when the conversations have been about defunding, to quote some of the organizers that I know, right, that defunding is the floor and not the ceiling of what it is that we're imagining and reaching for. We're very much close to time, and I just wanted to do a quick whip around of a one sentence like answer to this question, because I think thinking about this moment in the pandemic, I think people are feeling very burned out and stretched across like all of their different things, whether that's art making, activism. So there's like a lot of questions going on about like, what do I do with like my time, energy, and capacity? So I think just really quickly going around like one sentence on how you're balancing this like right now for you, and what you have to address of like how to kind of either re-energize people or maybe give them the kind of solace that sometimes it is also okay to rest. So a really quick go around on this question of balancing time, energy, and ability, and then I'll pass it back to Film Forum.
I can go first. So what I say to people is to pace yourself and do what makes sense for you, especially over the next few weeks during this incredibly challenging and anguishing election, because the real work is going to become, with hopefully a positive outcome, to unravel the damage that has been done not just over the last 4 years, but over the last many centuries in this country, and to really connect with your community. And, you know, today, the day that we are recording this, people will be watching it afterwards, but the day that we are recording this is World Mental Health Day. And just to always pause and connect with your friends and loved ones. That's what I say.
I love that. I've taken to meditation, which I never thought I was capable of. I was like, I'm too busy. I live in New York. Let's get over it. And then just 3 minutes was the start. And next thing you know, it's 15 minutes. And 2 years later, I like have a sound bowl. I mean, all of the things that can like make me feel good in this body, I'm attuned to that, and I give myself space to be messy or glorious, or watch the reality TV for a blip, or whatever it requires for me to be okay in that moment. I do it so that I can get back to work. It is not it's not a race, as they say. It's a marathon, and you have to take water breaks, and sometimes replenishing the well, however that suits you. You just have to make sure that you're taking care of your best self, so that you can return to the front line ready to do your part.
Mine is laughter. It's always been and always will be. Laugh if it's by yourself, or laugh with someone. I would say laugh. I spent every night, almost every night that I went to sleep or tried to go to sleep incarcerated. While I was incarcerated, I watched a 30-minute comedy show, whatever was on at that time, with the basic channels we were given on the TV, and I would just feel good. That moment of feeling good and laughing, my entire body physiologically felt good, and it got me through the night or the next day. So I would just say, I would encourage everybody to laugh by yourself. It's okay. It doesn't make you look crazy. Or if you could find someone to laugh with someone.
Wait, Adnan, I really want to know, what is making you laugh? What's the show that you watch? Because I want that tip.
I mean, what inside it was just, sorry to say, it was whatever was on ABC, NBC, or CBS. So like King of Queens, 2.5 Men, I don't know, just whatever was on. I had no other. But anyways, now it's my little 5-month-old child that makes me laugh. So that's for me. And we're out of time, but thanks for that question.
Yes, thank you all for ending us with Joy, and Joe and Sonia. Welcome you both back to close us out.
Thank you so much, all of you. Wow, clearly we could keep going for another couple hours. We're just so thankful to have you all here to talk about these issues. And the word that is kind of kicking around in my head is proximity. That came up a lot. Proximity and empathy. And I just sort of love the way that this film, Aggie, it sort of collapsed the distances, I think, for those of us who are watching and listening to you all talking. Just hearing Adnan and meeting, even though we're in our little squares, we're not really together, but it's a real thing that Adnan could still be in prison right now. And Mahogany, you've written very personally about the way the prison system has affected your family and yourself personally. And we have so many divisions in our country right now. And one of them, I think, is very people who are directly affected by policing and the prison system, and people who aren't, and who are sort of protected. And this kind of event, I think, really does bring us proximal to each other, and more educated in that sense. I also just want to say quickly that I think the other thing that gets collapsed is just even this binary of art and activism. I still am in conversations sometimes where people sort of pit them against each other, or trying to figure out how do you do both. And I think this conversation makes it very clear that that's in some ways a ridiculous question, or it's a very privileged question, I think, to even think of them as not one and the same. That seemed really clear to me tonight. And we just really appreciate all of you, the way that you're modeling that, the way that you're brought your passion about all that tonight. Just real quick, there was one question that someone asked about whether Aggie, the film, might make it to be shown in prisons through CCTV, which leads me to also ask a question to Adnan, what you think your colleagues would think of the film, or how people would react. So maybe, Tanya, maybe you can also answer that.
Yeah, first they'll be like, what, 165 million for that? That's what they'll say, right? But it's possible. We've sent videos in and for the institutional channel to play throughout the state of California. I don't know how other states work, but I will also say that Aggie and I and Kat and Helena, we all met in San Quentin. So that's when I first met them in 2017 while I was still serving a life sentence. So people would love to see that there. Love to see Aggie there, because there's some of them are featured in it. There's pictures of San Quentin, their visit in Aggie in the documentary.
Yeah, and I was gonna, as Adnan mentioned, I was gonna say that in the film you see how Aggie herself went into the prison so that she could see for herself, and it catalyzed even more her commitment to fight this modern day slavery. And I think it's going to be a crucial component of the social impact campaign, which again, go to aggiefilm.com, follow Aubin Pictures on Instagram to stay updated about this. But I think it's a must. It's an absolute must, whether it's the whole film or even just short social cuts and outtakes from the film that we can show in prisons. Because I think that everybody needs to see this. I really want there to be a screening, for government officials, for Congress, in the White House. Like, everybody needs to get behind this. And also for all the billionaires and trillionaires out there, they all need to see this and throw down their gloves too. So that's what I would say.
All right. On that note, thank you again to all of you for spending this time with us. Thanks to Lily and Jeffreen at the Asian American Writers Workshop, of course, Kat Gund and Christina at Aubin. Thanks to all of you who came, and we're going to sign out and let Joe wrap up.
Bye, everyone. And I also just wanted to say that I've felt so humbled and so moved by tonight's conversation. So I really just want to thank all of you for your knowledge and your commitment and your courage. Especially Rachel, thank you so much. Your moderation was beautiful. And I was especially moved that the final question was, take care of each other, take care of yourself, and laugh. So I want to say goodnight to everyone with that in mind, and just reiterate that. If you liked what you saw tonight, please consider making a donation to our COVID-19 emergency fund. You can do so at filmforum.org/support. At filmforum.org, we are very proud of our virtual cinema platform. We're presenting, of course, a dynamic selection of premieres, including documentaries like Aggie, world cinema, American independence, as well as all of our restored classics. Finally, please stay connected to us through our email newsletter and our social media handle, Film Forum NYC, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We will keep you all up to date with additions to our virtual cinema roster and other upcoming amazing virtual events like this evening's. Again, thank you so much, and we wish you all health and happiness at this time. Thank you.